Just a couple quick disclaimers before we get into things. This video was originally written and recorded prior to the release of the trailer for Season 4, and it does sound like the ramblings of an unhinged madman, which is because it is, but if you'd like to hear those ramblings, please do stick around. I really like Marvel Rivals. I really like it. And I've always been such a fan of both the Marvel comics and their interpretations and adaptations over the years. So to see one of my favorite styles of game adopt such a close-to-comic rendition of the Marvel Universe has really touched my soul in a way that the MCU and great shows like X-Men the Animated Series and Avengers EMH never really has. So before the game even came out, I'd been wondering, what parts of the universe would I like to see put in the game, and what would I add if I was given the opportunity to pitch an entire season of playable content for the game? And then I realized that that would never happen realistically, so now I'm just making a YouTube video about it. Now before we get into the actual pitch that I have for Season 4 of Marvel Rivals, I want to get a few things out of the way first. Number 1, at the time of recording this, no official news has come out about Marvel Rivals Season 4. It might take me a wee while to edit this, and there might be a full trailer out by now. Number 2, Marvel has reportedly allowed NetEase to add their own original characters into the game, which doesn't make sense to me as there's still so many unique characters that could be brought in for even decades worth of content to come. But if NetEase wants to include OCs, I feel like NPCs that are important to the story, but not necessarily the playable characters the season is built around, is a fine way to go about it. So I'm going to try and include at least one part of the Marvel Universe in this pitch that is relatively unexplored and does leave room for some of those OC NPCs to be major parts of the plot. Number 3, we spent most of the first 3 seasons of this game on Earth, and have only just recently gone to visit space, which is on a planet that we had already visited before. So, I want to explore the cosmos just a little bit more before we crash land back down to Earth. Number 4, Angela is one of the most heavily rumored characters for this next season of Marvel Rivals, and I don't actually know much about her, so I wasn't willing to include her. However, I still did want to reference that a tiny bit, so I went in a more Asgardian and Thor related direction for both the locations and the characters. Number 5, each of the characters that I'm going to be adding here and each of the locations are going to have a story connection to themselves. Alright, with all that said and done and all those parameters and all of those rules set aside, let's get into my pitch for Marvel Rivals Season 4.0. We open on a defeated Null, with Phoenix and Blade standing tall over him, and the All Black lying strewn at his side. The Necrosword realizes that its original master is currently in no state to wield it, and launches itself into space. The Guardians of the Galaxy and Thor go to investigate where the proto-symbiote is sending itself, while the rest of the heroes corner their now wrecked symbiote god. Cutting to Starlin's bar and the repurposed, decapitated head of a Celestial commonly known as Nowhere. A pale humanoid patron sits at the bar and drinks away his sorrows underneath a black shawl. He hears a crash outside and feels the darkness calling to him. At last, his blade has come home. Gore the God Butcher steps outside and reaches down, the blade reaching its black tendrils out to attach itself to one of its most successful wielders. The All Black whispers to Gore that it must be brought back to its home forge at the center of nowhere, to be reforged, and to become suitable to slaughter once more. Many heroes stand in the way of Gore, and those many heroes, chief among them Cosmo, Drax, Gamora, and Bug, get tossed aside by the living abyss housed within the Godslayer blade. The Milano lands just as Gore reaches the doors of the forge where his immortal weapon was forged all of those eons ago. The heroes have to evacuate nowhere and find a way to stop the reforging of Null's Annihila Blade. Alright, so the playable character for this first half of the season is obviously Gore the God Butcher, and the playable area is obviously Nowhere. Now you may ask why, and I will say to you that Nowhere is just so amazingly awesome and cool as a concept, and yeah, I know, you just want to hear about Gore. Now the reason that I picked Gore the God Butcher to be in this season is because recently his adaptations have been kind of meh, and I really think that he needs a massive rehabilitation in the public eye, and Marvel Rivals is the perfect place to do something like that. Let me try and establish a format in which I'll pitch the way in which I think these characters should most likely play. In the background, as I say this, you'll probably see a few different ideas that I have for skins and how the character might look. And while I do that, I'm probably going to be listing off at least 3 regular abilities, an ultimate ability, and a passive ability. If you have any ideas for different abilities the character could have, or even full different kits that this character could have, fully tell me in the comments below. Even tell me some different comic looks or adaptations that you really like the design of and you think could be a really cool skin for the character. Now I want to make Gore a Vanguard, mostly just because I think there's way too many duelists in the game, and he doesn't really seem like the kind of character to be a strategist. The way that I want to counteract his small stature is by making him the lowest health Vanguard in the game. I think Thor is currently in there somewhere around 625, so I think it would be really good for Gore to be sitting somewhere around 550 to 600 range, which is massively low for a Vanguard, but still, again, makes up for the fact that he's harder to hit than most of the other Vanguards. Also, to adjust for this, I do want to give him a slightly higher speed than most Vanguards, somewhere around like an unboosted Captain America. So anyway, with all that housekeeping out of the way, my first ability that I'm giving him is going to be called Abyssal Entryways. And essentially, Gore will be able to set up points within a 30-meter radius of himself that he can teleport to by essentially connecting networks, similar to like the vents from Among Us. And I know that sounds like a dumb connection, but hear me out here. Gore can hop into any entryway that he chooses that he has already set up, and then he can choose any of the other already set up entryways to dive into, essentially, like how some of the vents are connected in Among Us. Now, a way to kind of counteract the fact that this is a massive movement ability for an already pretty quick tank is that whilst he's in these entryways, he can be damaged by shooting any of the other entryways. Also, these entryways have health, and they can be destroyed pretty quickly, similar to like a Loki clone. The second ability that I want to give Gore is called Sword Stance, and I know that is the name of a Pokemon move. You'll kind of get what I'm talking about. Essentially, he's just going to slam the Necroblade into the ground and give all nearby allies 100 overhealth, and while they have that overhealth, they get to boost their melee damage. Only their melee damage though, it's not going to affect any ranged things. So, if Iron Man gets that boost, he's not going to be able to do much, but if you give someone like Wolverine or Magic that kind of a boost, that's going to be a massive impact for your team. Now Gore's third ability I'm dubbing Cloaked in the Abyss, where the Necrosword will turn into essentially an extension of that black shawl I mentioned him wearing earlier, and it'll become like an opaque shield just below head height. The interesting thing that I want to give this cloak, which is essentially feels kind of like Magneto's big wall shield, is that it will let through small amounts of damage. So things like Punisher's little assault rifle rounds, those can get through and cause damage, but larger amounts of damage like Winter Soldier's pistol rounds or things like that will not actually get through, and they will be completely nullified by that cloak. Oh, and something I also forgot to mention is that Gore can't attack while he's using that ability because the Necrosword has turned into the shield. Now, an interesting passive ability I wanted to give him because, as I said earlier, the Necrosword is the proto-symbiote. It is the first symbiote, and it's a part of something called the Living Abyss. Now, to my knowledge, the fact that it being a part of, or even being this living abyss, means that it doesn't necessarily have to take the form of a sword, it just usually chooses to, and its wearer usually chooses to wield it as a sword. But in it being this, like, original, primal form of darkness, I want it to deal at least like a half second of anti-heal to any affected enemies, and that's just for any ability that includes Gore hitting you with some portion of his blade or his sword or an area of effect that is caused by the Necro Sword. Now, with that being said, for Gore's ultimate ability, I want him to set up an area around himself that not only gives damage boost to allies' melee abilities and gives them 50 overhealth, but it blinds enemies and gives them anti-heal, whilst also negating all ranged attacks that are at least 5 meters above the affected area. Anything above 5 meters, so if you've got an Iron Man or a Storm flying over the area, they can still be shot down completely fine. But if you got someone who's on the ground, they're probably pretty safe from ranged attacks. And also that blindness that I'm talking about is going to be something similar to how Cloak blinds you. Oh, and also, it does damage over time and slows enemies, just in case it wasn't already overpowered enough. Now, with that kit all being said and done, again, I've mentioned it before, give me feedback in the comments. Tell me, oh, this was really cool, or this was, why did you do this? How, what? Just tell me. Tell me what you think about this. Give me ideas. Say, oh, actually, I think this could be a really interesting idea for the kit you've started. Or, here's an entirely brand new kit also based on its comic book counterpart. Now, with that being said, I believe we are done with the Gore the God Butcher part of the video, so if that was all you were here for, goodbye. Actually, no, not goodbye, please do stick around. I'd like to talk a bit more about the rest of the pitch. I spent a lot of time on this. Please. Alright, you're staying? Yippee! Alright, on to Nowhere. Now, the reason that I picked Nowhere is just to establish it within the world of Marvel Rivals, as it can be a hub for so many of these cosmic beings and these alien characters to simply just be at and hang out in, because it is a city. And it could be an incredible opportunity to bring stories in the future to Nowhere and be able to rope in all of these characters, like I mentioned earlier. Drax, Gamora, Cosmo, Bug, Moondragon, Quasar, Starbrand, Captain Marvel. There's so many, like, intergalactic characters who would all have a pretty decent reason for just hanging out in Nowhere at some point during the story. Now, in terms of its actual gameplay, I would say that, at least in terms of the story context of this, Nowhere would probably be a convergence map, where the heroes are trying to take the heat away from the Forge at the center of Nowhere, which is actually in the comics where the Necro Sword was created, just so that Gore can't reforge it and make it stronger and better. Now, I feel like I've talked about everything I want to talk about in this first half of the season, so on to the second half. The time stream splitting up didn't just bring the future backwards towards us. It also drew the universe's past hurtling towards our present. This has resulted in planets once gone coming back to both haunt and assist the universe during this ongoing conflict. One of those planets is Corbin, much to the delight of Beta Ray Bill, who's been traveling around the planet that was once his home and delighting in the sights and memories he formed on his home planet when he was younger. Far away from Corbin, the heroes have failed to stop Gore from reforging his blade, and the All Black has been reforged and is now as strong as it has ever been. Gore realizes that he must find a slew of gods who are unprepared for his slaughter in order to warm himself up for the genocide he is about to partake in. And thus, he decides to attack one of the planets that has been brought forward in time that will not know of his extensive reputation and repertoire. Thus, he decides to head for Corbin. Once Gore lands, the rest of the heroes on both Clintar and Nowhere get a distress signal from Beta Ray Bill, as he knows how just relentless and bloody the God Butcher can be. After piling the injured heroes onto the Milano, the Guardians and Thor head off for Corbin, whilst the Phoenix carries the rest of the heroes from Clintar. Now the heroes must stop Gore's miniature god bombs from detonating and killing all of the gods on Corbin. So the second half of this season continues on from the last half, obviously, by introducing a new area and character into the mix. The playable character for the season is obviously Beta Ray Bill, and before I get into how I would make him play, I wanted to mention that the reason that I chose Corbin as an area for the new map to be in and make it important to the story of the season is because it is so unexplored in the comics that NetEase can easily go mad with OC creations of their own for Corbinites and Corbinite gods that Gore can then target. Now, Beta Ray Bill is a character that I've seen mentioned a few times as a possibility for a playable character in Marvel Rivals, and I want to do something with him that I haven't seen a lot of people talking about, and that's make him into a strategist, because again, there's way too many f***ing duelists in this game. With there being too many duelists in the game as well, you want to bring in people who are already playing duelists into maining these other roles, like Vanguard and Strategist. So, I wanted to make both Gore and Beta Ray Bill have a more duelist style loadout while still being a part of their respective classes. For Beta Ray Bill, I would want him to be a very buff and slightly slower strategist with the health pool around 250 to 275 and speed comparable to that of like the Punisher. For a team-up ability, he could share in the awakened state that Thor has, and he could gain an attack range and 50 bonus health. For his first ability, Beta Ray Bill is able to swap between two of his most iconic and powerful weapons from the comics, those being the Twilight Sword from Muspelheim and Stormbreaker. Now, Twilight Sword draws upon the fiery energy of Muspelheim to power itself, and Stormbreaker is essentially similar to Mjolnir in being a hammer that wields the power of lightning and thunder. Now, for his melee attacks for those, I would make his sword be a bit slower, but do more damage, and his hammer be a bit quicker, but do slightly less damage. And if he has that awakened state buff, his sword can apply burning to his enemies, and Stormbreaker would have a chance to chain lightning off to hit any enemies within like a 3 to 5 meter radius if he makes contact with his first target. I would also make the cooldown for this ability like 5 seconds, so that when you switch to a weapon, you're kind of locked into that for a short while, but you can switch back out relatively quickly. I would also want to give him an alt fire more than his melee, which would be a beam attack similar to like Iron Man's Unibeam, with Stormbreaker healing allies and the Twilight Sword damaging enemies. Now the second ability that I want to give Bill would just help the allies that he has around him, and would change depending on which weapon he has currently active when he uses the ability. If he has the Twilight Sword, then it buffs the damage and speed of his allies around him, and if he has Stormbreaker active, it simply heals them and gives them an extra few seconds afterwards of regeneration and healing. I also think it would be really fun for this ability to change names depending on what weapon you had active at the time, with the Twilight Sword of course being like the Call of Muspelheim or something like that, and Stormbreaker being like the Call of the Storm. An extra idea that I had as well, which possibly might make this move a bit overpowered, or could possibly be limited to just if he shares, again, that awakened state with Thor, would be enemies within that area would either be slowed if it was Stormbreaker, or would be burned if it was the Twilight Sword. For his third ability, I would just give him a movement ability, which would again depend on the weapon that he has available, with Stormbreaker throwing Bill up into the sky to escape from enemies. Possibly he could use that to leap up to a ledge behind or even in front of him. And the Twilight Sword essentially just being able to push him horizontally in any direction that he wishes. And finally, for his ultimate ability, I would give Bill something along the lines of possibly calling it the Champion of Corbin, or something like that, like a nickname that he has in the comics. And it would essentially just be 10 seconds of that unibeam alt fire that I mentioned earlier, except from both weapons, making the sphere a bit wider and doing a bit more damage to enemies. Now, I'm not too happy with this build, I will say, and if you have any suggestions for a new kit, or even just improvements to this current one, please, again, leave them in the comments below. I would love, love, love to hear from you. Even just giving me names for the abilities I mentioned that I didn't give names to would be supremely appreciated. So on to the actual map. Corbin is obviously the setting for the second half of the story for this season, so I would try and make it a map. However, I felt that with this story, there was only really one game mode that stuck out to me as the one that you need to play, and it's not a game mode that's actually in Marvel Rivals. It's in a different hero shooter, what I consider the OG hero shooter, and one of my favorite games of all time, Team Fortress 2. Now, the game mode that I am talking about from Team Fortress 2 is called Symmetrical Control Point. Now, I feel that the actual game mode of Symmetrical Control Points is so similar to what is already in Marvel Rivals. Matter of fact, almost every single part of it is already in the game in different varying game modes, that putting it together would be more of just a remix of what's already in the game versus creating an entirely new game mode, so it would have some similar sense of familiarity. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Symmetrical Control Point, it is essentially just a version of the Control Point game mode, where there are multiple capturable points in the map at the same time. One of those points is in the center and is completely neutral. Another one of those points is captured by your team. Another one of those points is captured by the enemy team, with the neutral control point being in the middle and your team's respective point being more close to your own team's spawn. Now, the goal of the game is to capture all three of the control points, and you can wrestle control away from your opponents, as in any good control point game. Overall, this is really familiar to people who are already playing Marvel Rivals in game modes such as Domination and Resource Rumble, and I think that story-wise, it fits really well narratively, with all of these points being set up by Gore to set all these small little god bombs off, and the heroes simply just trying to deactivate those bombs. So overall, that's all I wanted to say on this topic. That's all I wanted to say in this pitch. Now, what did you think that I did really well? What did you think that I did that was absolutely horrible? Were there any changes you'd like to make? Are there any ideas that you have for seasons of your own? Give me all of your suggestions and all of your thoughts in the comments below. I know the general YouTube thing of like, subscribe, do that if you want to. If you don't want to and you think this is a horrible style of video, you never want to hear from me again, give this video a dislike even if you want to. But again, that's all I want to say for now. So, until you see my next video, if you even do see my next video, have a lovely time. Ta-ta!